Before we begin, subscribe now, for what I'm about to reveal will drag you into the gaslit shadows of Victorian England, where the living feasted not on music or wine alone, but on the flesh of the long dead. London, 19th century. Fog smothered the streets, and behind velvet curtains, the middle class sought amusements ever stranger. Their empire stretched into Egypt, and from its tombs, they plundered not only gold but bodies, mummies, bound in brittle linen, their silence mistaken for consent. At first, they were trophies for parlors and cabinets, displayed like curiosities. But soon, the hunger sharpened. To merely possess a mummy was not enough. The thrill lay in tearing away its wrappings under candlelight, exposing its hollow face to an audience, trembling between horror and delight. Invitations spread, promising an evening's entertainment most unusual. And so was born the fashion of the mummy unwrapping party. Imagine it, chandeliers trembling, perfumes mixing with the dry sweetness of resin, a coffin dragged into the center of the room. A physician's hand lifts the scalpel. The hush before the cut is heavy, so heavy, you might think the dead themselves were listening. This, dear listener, is the stage upon which our tale unfolds. A world where fascination with the afterlife bled into parlors and ballrooms, where the Victorians danced with death itself. Stay close, our descent has only begun. The invitations always spoke with elegance, an evening of refinement and curiosity. A gathering most rare, guests arrived in velvet carriages, their boots tapping lightly on the cobblestones, as if afraid to disturb the mist. They stepped into parlors transformed into tombs. Drapes painted with hieroglyphs hung over walls, golden scarabs glittered from mantelpieces, and incense burned to mimic the air of ancient shrines. At the center of it all waited the true spectacle, the mummy, sometimes still encased in its coffin, painted eyes gazing upward in eternal stillness. Other times stretched across a table draped in damask, its form narrow, its wrappings browned by centuries of dust and resin. The guests whispered. Silk skirts rustled like dry leaves, and gentlemen fingered their watch chains with nervous anticipation. There was laughter too, but thin, fragile, the sort that dies quickly in the throat. Everyone's eyes fixed upon the host, usually a doctor or collector swollen with self-importance, who stood ready with scalpel or scissors. The candles sputtered, the room hushed. And then came the first cut. It was not a grand sound, merely the dry tear of ancient cloth. Yet in that silence, it might as well have been thunder. A strip of bandage curled to the floor, fragile as ash. Another followed, and another, until the linen yielded its secret. A hand appeared withered, leather dark, fingers stiff as claws. Gasps broke out. Some women leaned closer, others shrank behind their fans. The air thickened with the sweet, sickly smell of resin, long buried, yet suddenly alive again. And then, the face. Hollow cheeks, lips shriveled back to bare the teeth in a grin that mocked the living. Eye sockets deep as wells. For a heartbeat, no one moved. It was as though the dead had returned their gaze, daring them to laugh. But laugh they did. Nervous at first, then louder, desperate to shatter the spell. Wine was poured. Music struck up in the corner. Guests toasted the triumph of progress, of science, of empire. And all the while, the corpse lay upon the table, mute and unblinking, as though waiting for its turn to speak. Not all nights ended in merriment. There were whispers of fainting fits, of strange sicknesses the next morning, of dreams filled with sand and whispering voices. Servants spoke of wrappings shifting on their own, of eyes opening when no one else was watching. Yet society returned again and again, for the thrill outweighed the dread. The Victorians, so obsessed with mourning, so draped in black for every funeral, found no contradiction here. In the parlor, death was not feared, it was performed, consumed, applauded. The mummy had become both guest and entertainment, a silent participant in the grotesque theater of empire. What began as a curiosity of the wealthy soon became the fever of the city. To say you had attended a mummy unwrapping was to declare yourself not only fashionable, but modern, enlightened, superior. Whispers traveled through salons and coffee houses. Did you see the Pharaoh's priest laid bare in Bloomsbury last night? Or the doctor on Cavendish Square revealed the most exquisite specimen skin as black as lacquer, teeth still shining like pearls. Middle-class families, desperate to imitate the aristocracy, clawed their way into such gatherings. Invitations became currency, and when none could be found, tickets were sold discreetly, as though one were attending a forbidden play. Respectable matrons, clerks, even students found themselves huddled under chandeliers, watching with the same mixture of horror and delight as the wrappings fell. The demand became insatiable. Ships returning from Alexandria carried crates marked medical supplies that in truth contained the plunder of tombs. Auction houses brimmed with coffins and bandaged corpses, sold to the highest bidder. Some mummies were ground into powder, sold as medicine to cure every ill. Others were displayed in drawing rooms like grotesque trophies, a reminder that empire had conquered not only lands, but death itself. But greed always breeds deceit. Soon, Egyptians under colonial strain began to feed the appetite with fraud. Criminals, paupers, even plague victims were wrapped hastily in strips of linen, stained with herbs to mimic resin, and sold as ancient royalty. A family might boast of owning a cousin of Pharaoh, when in truth, they entertained the corpse of a thief or beggar. The deception mattered little. The thrill was in the spectacle, not the truth. When the cloth was sliced away and the withered form emerged, who among the audience dared ask whether this was truly a priest of Amun, or merely a common murderer? To the living, all corpses looked the same when unbound. The obsession bled into fashion. Scarab brooches glittered on ladies' gowns. Gentlemen commissioned canes, carved with falcon heads. Wallpaper mimicked hieroglyphs. Perfume bore names like Essence of the Nile or Tears of Isis. Even funerals borrowed the motifs of Egypt. Coffins painted in imitation of sarcophagi, mourners clutching charms shaped like ankhs. And yet, beneath the laughter and applause, a whisper lingered. Was it the rustle of silk or the sound of linen shifting in protest? Did the guests truly believe they could disturb the eternal without consequence? At first, the parties ended in laughter and chatter over wine and music. But as years passed, shadows began to cling to the memories of those nights. Guests awoke pale, trembling from dreams of sand swallowing their beds, of eyes glimmering in the dark. Servants whispered of footsteps echoing in empty halls, the faint rasp of cloth dragging across the floor where no one walked. It was the press that gave the whispers a name, the curse of the Pharaohs. A collector on Russell Square was said to have died within weeks of unwrapping a priestess. His servants swore the curtains had moved, though the windows were shut, and that the last words on his lips were, "She is here." Another gentleman's house burned to ash the very night he displayed his trophy from Thebes. The newspapers printed the story with relish. Ancient fire consumes modern pride. More tales followed. A young woman who attended a mummy party fainted during the unwrapping. She recovered, but weeks later was found cold in her chamber, her face twisted as if screaming at something no one else could see. The doctor blamed consumption, but the neighbors whispered of linen-bound hands pressing against her throat in the night. Not all tragedies struck the aristocracy. In one notorious case, a merchant imported a coffin, eager to profit by charging admission for an unwrapping. On the day of the event, his carriage overturned, shattering his skull. When the coffin was opened later, the mummy's face bore a fractured grin, as though mocking his fate. The stories multiplied. A crate containing mummies sank with its ship in the channel. A physician collapsed mid-demonstration, his scalpel slipping from lifeless fingers onto the corpse he had just unveiled. Every accident, every illness, every untimely death found its explanation in the same chilling refrain. The dead do not forgive disturbance. Even those who scoffed at superstition admitted to strange sensations. Some claimed to hear whispers in forgotten tongues, to smell resin in rooms long scrubbed clean. Others swore that when they stared into the hollow sockets of a mummy, they felt the gaze returned steady, patient, hateful. By the final decades of the century, the curse had become legend. Each gathering bore not only the thrill of spectacle, but the weight of dread. Guests still came, but their laughter was strained, their toasts brittle. Every snuffing candle made them glance toward the corpse, half expecting it to rise, to claim what was owed. The Victorians prided themselves on progress, on science, on empire. Yet beneath the chandeliers, with wrappings strewn across the carpet and the stench of ages filling their lungs, even the most rational mind quivered. For in those moments, they knew, death was no puppet, and the strings they pulled might tighten around their own throats. By the last years of the 19th century, the laughter had grown quieter. What was once fashionable now carried the stench of unease. The same drawing rooms that had roared with applause at the sight of unwrapped flesh now held only silence. Curtains fell, invitations ceased. London, at last, began to turn away from its morbid amusement. The reasons were many. Science clothed itself in respectability, no longer willing to share its discoveries with parlors drunk on spectacle. The newspapers, once eager to advertise mummy parties, now filled their columns with stories of curses, hauntings, and ruin. And the whispers, the whispers never stopped. Too many deaths, too many accidents, too many faces pale with fear after brushing too close to the ancient dead. Yet the obsession did not die. It slumbered, waiting. And in 1922, when Howard Carter pushed his lantern into the tomb of Tutankhamun, the world gasped anew. For here was no parlor trick, but a burial chamber sealed for millennia, a Pharaoh's curse written in silence across the walls. When Lord Carnarvon, Carter's patron, perished soon after the discovery, blood poisoning from a trivial bite, the legend roared back to life. The Victorians had played with corpses. Now, the corpses played with them. In truth, the so-called curse was rumor, superstition, a story spun from coincidence. But the public no longer cared for truth. They remembered the unwrappings, the laughter over rotting flesh, the arrogance of men who thought themselves masters of death. And in every untimely death that followed Tutankhamun's unveiling, they heard the echo of linen tearing in a candlelit parlor, and they shivered. The mummy parties were gone, but their ghost remained. Museums locked their treasures behind glass, but even there, the gaze of the dead seemed to linger, unblinking, unbroken. Visitors still paused, still swallowed hard, still felt the weight of those hollow sockets upon their own eyes. And perhaps that is the final jest of history, that the Victorians, who unwrapped the dead for amusement, now lie buried themselves. Their bodies rest beneath stone, their names etched into fading epitaphs. One wonders, when the centuries turn, when their coffins are pried open by hands, yet unborn, will laughter rise again over their withered remains? So I leave you here, at the threshold of shadow and memory. The candles burn low, the wrappings lie scattered on the floor, and the dead wait in silence. Subscribe now, if you dare, for the past is never truly buried, and neither, perhaps, are we.